You know what's funny about wanting something until you actually get it? Sometimes you realize you are asking for all the wrong things. I'm Lila, I'm 28, and I just learned this lesson in the most humiliating way possible. Thomas and I had what everyone called a solid marriage. 3 years in, decent apartment, splitting bills like responsible adults. He worked in warehouse management, steady paycheck, reliable as clockwork. Me, I handled client accounts downtown. On paper, we were winning at life. In reality, I was dying of boredom. Don't misunderstand, Thomas is genuinely a good guy. The type who remembers anniversary dates and listens when you complain about your coworkers. But that was exactly the problem. He was safe, predictable, the human equivalent of beige wallpaper, inoffensive but completely forgettable. Our bedroom situation was tragic. Thomas approached intimacy like he approached everything else. Careful, methodical, asking if I was comfortable every 5 minutes. Sweet? Sure. Exciting? Not even close. I'd hint about trying new things, maybe getting adventurous, and he'd get awkward and mumble about being happy with how things are. Meanwhile, I'm reading articles online about couples rekindling their spark, and open relationships kept appearing as this magical solution. Success stories about stepping outside marriage actually saving it. How experiencing other people makes you appreciate what you have. How it brings back excitement you thought was gone forever. Those articles conveniently skip the disaster stories, but honestly, I wasn't looking for those anyway. I started testing waters with Thomas. Casual comments about how young we were, how maybe we were settling into old married couple territory too early. How some friends seemed more adventurous than us. Thomas would nod thoughtfully, but change subjects. That's the thing about Thomas, he's a people pleaser, especially with me. 2 weeks of strategic conversations and maybe some tears about feeling sexually unfulfilled finally cracked him. We sat down with wine and hammered out rules. No mutual friends, no emotional attachments. Random hookups didn't require disclosure, but anything regular needed transparency. Simple, clean, mature. Thomas asked repeatedly if I was sure this would help us. Every single time, I said absolutely. What I didn't mention was already having someone in mind. Reed worked for a different company in our building, and we'd been playing this flirty dance for months. Casual elevator conversations, lingering eye contact during lunch breaks, him finding excuses to visit my floor. The kind of attention that reminded me what being wanted felt like. Within a week, I made my move. Stayed late one night, accidentally ran into Reed by elevators, and when he suggested drinks, I didn't hesitate. 3 drinks in, I casually mentioned Thomas and I had opened our marriage. Reed's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Our first hookup happened during lunch break at some hourly hotel Reed knew. It was everything my marriage wasn't. Passionate, spontaneous, dangerous. Reed knew exactly what he wanted and wasn't afraid to take it. For the first time in months, I felt alive. Thomas noticed immediately. I was happier, more energetic, actually initiated sex for the first time in weeks. When he asked what changed, I smiled and said the new arrangement was working. He seemed genuinely pleased I was happy, which made me feel simultaneously guilty and vindicated. About a month in, Thomas mentioned chatting with women on dating apps. Nothing serious yet, just testing waters like me. I felt this weird jealousy ping, which was ridiculous since I was sneaking around with Reed twice weekly, but I pushed it down and told him I was happy for him. Reed and I fell into routine quickly. Lunch breaks twice weekly, sometimes after work drinks when Thomas had his own dates. Reed was everything Thomas wasn't. Confident, aggressive, boundary-pushing. He made me feel like the sexiest woman alive instead of someone's comfortable wife. The first time Thomas actually hooked up with someone, he came home glowing. Different cologne on his shirt, lightness in his step I hadn't seen in ages. When I asked how it went, he just smiled and said, "Good," before changing subjects. That one-word answer bothered me more than detailed recap would have. But I had Reed, so what did it matter? Thomas could have his little adventures. I was getting exactly what I wanted. Stability at home, excitement on the side. Perfect. Except Thomas was slowly transforming into someone I barely recognized. Someone more confident, mysterious, interesting. Someone becoming everything I'd wanted him to be, just not for me. Month 2 brought complications I hadn't anticipated. Reed started suggesting dinner after our hotel visits. Real dates, not just sex and goodbye. Weekend texts asking about my day, sharing stories from his week. It felt like having a secret boyfriend, and after years of feeling invisible in my marriage, the attention was intoxicating. Thomas was having his own evolution. He'd started working out, ordered home equipment, bought better fitting clothes, going out more often, staying later, coming home with energy I hadn't seen since we first dated. It should have made me happy. This was supposed to be about becoming better versions of ourselves. Instead, it made me feel unsettled, like watching a stranger wear my husband's face. According to our rules, I had to disclose when Reed and I became serious. One night over dinner, I casually mentioned starting to see someone regularly. Someone I really liked. Thomas looked up, fork halfway to mouth. "That's good. I'm glad you're happy." "His name's Reed," I continued, watching for reactions. "We work in the same building. He's really great." I was lying. Reed worked for a different company. But admitting I was dating a coworker felt too messy. Thomas asked polite questions about how long, was Reed a good guy, did I feel safe? All very mature and supportive. So why did his calm acceptance frustrate me? "What about you?" I asked. "Any dates turning serious?" Thomas got this little smile I used to get when he looked at me. "Actually, yeah. There's this woman, Maxine. We've been seeing each other a few weeks. She's really something." That smile. The way his face lit up saying her name. Something twisted in my stomach that I didn't want to examine. "Tell me about her," I said, trying to sound supportive instead of nosy. Thomas just shrugged. "You'll meet her eventually. We're taking things slow." Taking things slow. Meanwhile, he'd met Reed when Reed picked me up from our apartment. Awkward as hell, but at least I was being transparent. Thomas was keeping his mystery woman hidden like a state secret. Changes in Thomas became impossible to ignore. More confident, decisive. When I'd make passive-aggressive comments about dishes or bills, my usual attention-getting method, he'd just handle it without lengthy discussion. He started having opinions about movies, restaurants, weekend plans that didn't include me. Reed noticed I was distracted during dates, asked if everything was okay at home, if Thomas was giving me grief. I said everything was fine, but honestly, Thomas wasn't giving me anything anymore. He was present but absent, physically there but emotionally elsewhere. This new Thomas was incredibly attractive. The confidence, mystery, the way he carried himself like he had secrets worth keeping. Everything I'd wanted him to be when we married. Except now he was becoming that person for someone else. I started paying closer attention to his schedule, moods, phone habits. Thomas had always been an open book, phone lying around, never minded if I glanced at messages. Now he kept it face down, took it to the bathroom, smiled at texts he didn't share. When I asked about Maxine again, Thomas deflected, said they were still figuring things out, didn't want to jinx anything. But his whole demeanor changed mentioning her. Softer, happier, like thinking about something wonderful. Reed was pushing for more commitment. Started talking future plans, trips we could take, how nice if I could spend whole nights instead of stolen hours. "You know this isn't sustainable forever," Reed said one afternoon in our usual hotel room. "Eventually you'll have to choose." "Choose what?" "Whether you want a real relationship or you're content being a part-time girlfriend forever." For the first time since this started, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. What I had with Reed was exciting, but also complicated and built on lies. What I had with Thomas was stable, but he was slipping away more each day. Month 4 brought the conversation I'd been dreading. Reed had been dropping hints about his company's expansion, opportunities in other cities, excitement about starting fresh somewhere new. I thought it was pillow talk until he made it real. "My company's opening a Dallas branch," he said, tracing circles on my shoulder. "They want me heading the transition team." My stomach dropped. "When?" "Next month. Huge opportunity, regional manager, big salary bump, the whole package." He looked down at me with those dark eyes. "I want you to come with me." I stared at the ceiling, processing what he was asking. "Reed, I'm married. I can't just move to Dallas." "Why not? What's keeping you here? A husband who treats you like a roommate? A marriage that's basically over?" His voice was gentle but insistent. "We could have something real, Lila. No more sneaking around. Just us, building a life together." The offer was tempting. Reed made good money. Better than Thomas, and he actually wanted me. Not the polite, distant version Thomas had settled for, but the real, passionate me. In Dallas, I could be someone new. But reality kicked in. Thomas and I owned our place together, had merged finances, 3 years of financial entanglement. Starting over at 28 felt thrilling and terrifying. I need time to think, I told Reed, which was wrong based on how his face changed. Time to think about what? Whether you want happiness or staying stuck in a dead marriage? It's not that simple. There's a lot to consider. He sat up, pulling away physically and emotionally. You know what I think? You like having options. Me as your exciting secret while keeping Thomas as your safety net. But I'm not interested in being your backup plan anymore. The accusation stung because it was partially true. Thomas was my safety net. Reed was my adventure. But it was more complicated than Reed understood. Reed gave me 2 weeks to decide. Come to Dallas and build something real, or stay in my pretend marriage and lose him forever. I spent those weeks in weird limbo. Reed was distant, but available, treating remaining hookups like goodbye sex. Thomas was more present than he'd been in months, but politely detached, making me feel like a guest in my own life. Thomas had started talking about Maxine more openly, sharing stories about dates, conversations, things they had in common. She worked in healthcare, loved hiking, read the same books he did. She sounded perfect for him in ways that made my chest tight. You should bring her by sometime, I heard myself say one night. I'd like to meet her. Thomas looked surprised. Really? I thought you preferred keeping things separate. I think it would be nice. You met Reed. Thomas considered, then shook his head. Maybe eventually. We're still figuring things out, and I don't want to complicate anything rushing into couple friends territory. Couple friends? Like what he and I used to be with other people. The night before Reed's deadline, Thomas came home from another Maxine date glowing like he'd won the lottery. Hummed getting ready for bed, smiled at his phone, moved through our apartment like floating on air. Good date? I asked casually. Really good, he said, and that smile could have powered our building. That's when I knew I couldn't go to Dallas. Not because I didn't want Reed, but because I couldn't bear watching Thomas be this happy knowing I'd never be the reason again. I told Reed the next morning I was staying. He called me a coward, said I was wasting my life, told me I'd regret choosing security over passion. Maybe he was right, but I'd rather regret staying than running from the mess I'd made. Reed left for Dallas without saying goodbye. And I was alone with my husband and the ghost of what we used to be. Reed's departure left me in emotional free fall I wasn't prepared for. For months he'd been the exciting center of my world, making me feel alive and desired. Without him I was just Lila again, married to a man who'd become a stranger. Thomas seemed completely unaffected by Reed's absence. When I mentioned my friend from work moved to Dallas, he just nodded and said, "That must be hard." No follow-up questions, no curiosity, no recognition that someone important had vanished from my life. Meanwhile, his relationship with Maxine was clearly escalating. Going out 3, sometimes 4 nights weekly. Staying out later, coming home with that satisfied glow, meaning things were going very well. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until morning, claiming he'd fallen asleep at a friend's after late nights out. The lies were transparently insulting. Thomas had never been a good liar, but his obvious deception made me angrier than honesty would have. I started feeling invisible in my own marriage. Thomas would come home barely acknowledging I existed. Shower, change, grab kitchen something, disappear with his phone. The man who used to want every detail of my day couldn't be bothered asking about work. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. Thomas was getting ready for another Maxine date, humming while picking clothes, checking his reflection like preparing for something important. "We need to talk," I said from the doorway. He glanced at me in the mirror. "Can it wait? I'm meeting Maxine in an hour." "It's about us, about our marriage." That got his attention. He turned around, and for a second I saw the old Thomas, concerned, attentive, ready to drop everything for me. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. "I want to close the marriage, go back to just being us." The words hung between us. I watched his face for surprise, relief, happiness that I was ready to recommit. Instead, he looked confused, uncomfortable, maybe panicked. "Close it? Why?" "Because this isn't working. We barely talk, we're like strangers. I miss what we used to have. Thomas sat on our bed's edge, running hands through hair. Lila, this was your idea. You wanted this arrangement. I know, but things change. Reed's gone, and I realized what I really want is focusing on us again. Reed's gone, he repeated slowly. So now that your outside relationship ended, you want me ending mine? The way he phrased it made it sound selfish and manipulative. It's not about Reed. It's about getting back to what really matters. What really matters, he said with an edge I'd never heard. Lila, you spent months barely looking at me unless you needed something. You turned our marriage into a business arrangement so you could have fun with your coworker. And now that he's moved away, you want me giving up the first real happiness I've felt in years? Real happiness. The words hit like physical blows. You're happy with her. Thomas's face softened slightly. Yeah, I am. Maxine makes me feel like myself again, like who I was before I started trying so hard to be what you wanted. I never asked you to be anything other than yourself. You didn't have to ask. You made it clear myself wasn't enough. He stood up, grabbing his jacket. I'm not ready to close this, Lila. I'm not ready to give up what I've found with her. Panic rose in my chest. So what does that mean for us? I don't know, but I'm not making big decisions right now. I'm finally happy, and I'm not apologizing for that. He left for his date, and I sat on our bed feeling dumped by my own husband. Over the next weeks, I tried everything to get his attention back. Cooked favorite meals, suggested activities we used to enjoy, bought lingerie Reed had liked. Nothing worked. Thomas was polite but distant, present but unavailable. The breaking point came when I flat out asked him to choose between me and Maxine. I need you to decide what's more important, I told him when he came home from another date. Your marriage or your girlfriend? Thomas stopped taking off his jacket. That's not fair, Lila. What's not fair is watching my husband fall in love with someone else and being expected to smile and support it. You wanted this, he said, voice harder than I'd ever heard. You pushed for this arrangement. You set the rules. Now that things aren't going your way, you want changing everything? I want my husband back. Thomas looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not anger, but something worse. Pity. I can't be that person anymore, Lila. I can't go back to being the guy who centered his world around making you happy while you looked elsewhere for excitement. I won't do it. He grabbed clothes from our dresser, throwing them into a bag. Not dramatically, just methodically, like checking items off a list. Where are you going? I'm staying somewhere else for a while. Give us both space to figure out what we actually want. Thomas, please, we can work this out. He paused at the bedroom door, bag in hand. Maybe we can, but not like this. Not with you trying to control the situation because you don't like how it turned out. That was 3 weeks ago. Thomas left and hasn't been back since. 2 weeks later, I got served divorce papers at work. Thomas had filed for dissolution, citing irreconcilable differences, asking for his share of joint assets. The papers included a lawyer's letter explaining Thomas wanted the process moving quickly. He was planning to remarry within the year and wanted starting fresh without legal complications. Remarry. Within the year. The divorce was swift and civil. Thomas was more than fair about everything, let me keep most furniture, didn't fight the apartment lease, even paid half the legal fees when he didn't have to. We met once to sign papers. Seeing him was like looking at a stranger wearing my ex-husband's face. Tan, confident, wearing clothes that fit his personality. When he smiled at his lawyer, it was the genuine smile I remembered from early dating days. You look good, I told him. Thanks. I feel good. He didn't return the compliment. Are you happy? Thomas considered seriously, like always. Yeah, I really am. For the first time in a long time, I'm exactly where I want to be, with exactly who I want to be with. 6 months later, I saw the wedding announcement on social media. Thomas and Maxine had married in a small ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Photos showed them laughing, dancing, looking at each other like they couldn't believe their luck. Thomas looked like the happiest man alive, and Maxine looked like someone who deserved to make someone that happy. They looked like people who'd built something real together. I closed the laptop and looked around my empty apartment, the same place where I'd started this mess wanting something more exciting. The rent was too expensive for one person, but I couldn't bring myself to move. It felt like admitting defeat. Reed had stopped answering my texts months ago. He'd found someone new in Dallas, someone without complicated history and divorce baggage. I was 30 now, single, finally understanding the difference between wanting something and deserving it. I'd wanted excitement, passion, options. I'd gotten all those things briefly. What I deserved was losing the one person who actually loved me while I was busy looking for something better. Thomas found his happily ever after with someone who appreciated what he offered. Reed found his fresh start with someone who could commit fully. And I was left with consequences of thinking I could have everything without risking anything. The house always wins, they say. I just never realized I was betting against myself the whole time.